What would you do if the people you trusted most turned out to be monsters hiding behind loving smiles? This is a story of betrayal so deep it crossed into murder, and a revenge so perfect it came from beyond the grave. If you love stories where justice finds its way, even when all hope seems lost, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless and restore your faith that evil never truly wins. This is a story that will haunt you in the best way possible. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next on this channel. The rain fell like tears from heaven on the day we buried Aunt Caroline, and I stood there under my black umbrella watching the coffin lower into the earth, thinking about how just 3 weeks ago she had called me laughing about the garden tomato she was growing, and now she was gone at 42 years old, supposedly from a sudden heart condition that nobody saw coming. But as I looked up from that grave, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Because there, walking toward us with his arm around a woman I had never seen before, was Uncle Marcus, my aunt's husband of 15 years. And this woman was young, maybe 30, with red hair and a black dress that seemed more cocktail party than funeral. And she wasn't crying. She was actually smiling, a small, satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. And Uncle Marcus had his hand on the small of her back, possessive and intimate. And I watched as my mother's face went white, as my father clenched his fists, and as my grandmother actually gasped out loud, because this was beyond disrespectful. This was monstrous. And the woman leaned into Uncle Marcus and whispered something in his ear, and he nodded, and they walked right up to the graveside and stood there as if they belonged there, as if this was perfectly normal. And I felt rage building inside me, hot and fierce, because my Aunt Caroline had been the kindest soul I ever knew. She raised me half the time when my parents were working. She taught me to bake and to paint and to see beauty in small things. And now here was her husband, the man who promised to love her forever, bringing his mistress to her funeral. And then something even stranger happened, because as the priest said the final words, Uncle Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, and I saw him quickly silence it, but not before I glimpsed the screen and saw a text message that read, "They don't suspect anything, we're almost free." And my heart started pounding, because what did that mean? And I looked at the woman again, really looked at her, and saw that her eyes were cold, calculating. And she caught me staring, and her smile widened just a fraction. And I knew right then that something was terribly wrong, that my aunt's death wasn't natural at all. And I felt this overwhelming need to know the truth, to find out what really happened, because Caroline deserved justice. And as everyone started walking back to their cars, I stayed behind, staring at that fresh grave, making a silent promise to my aunt that I would uncover whatever dark secret had led to her death. And I didn't care what it took or how long it would take, because she had always protected me, and now it was my turn to protect her memory. The next morning, I called my cousin David, who was a lawyer, and told him everything I had seen. And at first, he was skeptical, saying, "Grief makes us see things that aren't there." But when I mentioned the text message, his voice changed, and he said he would look into Caroline's medical records because he was listed as her emergency contact after Marcus. And that's when things started unraveling, because David called me back 3 hours later, his voice shaking, and said that Caroline's symptoms before she died didn't match a heart attack at all. She had complained of numbness, tingling, severe stomach pain, and her hair had started falling out in the last week of her life. And those were classic signs of poisoning, specifically arsenic poisoning. And my hands went numb as I held the phone, because that meant Marcus and that woman had murdered her, slowly, deliberately, over weeks or maybe months. And David said he was going to the police, but I told him to wait because we needed more evidence, something concrete. Because Marcus was wealthy and well-connected, and he would hire the best lawyers, and we needed to be absolutely sure. And so I did something I never thought I would do. I broke into my aunt's house using the spare key she had given me years ago. And I went at night when I knew Marcus was out, because I had been watching his patterns. And I searched that house top to bottom, looking for anything that could prove what they had done. And I found her diary, hidden in the back of her closet behind shoeboxes. And I sat on her bedroom floor, reading page after page of her beautiful handwriting, and my heart broke into pieces, because she had known. She wrote about how she found emails between Marcus and someone named Jennifer, about how she confronted him and he denied everything, but she knew. She wrote about feeling sick, getting weaker, not understanding why her doctors couldn't find anything wrong. And then the final entry, dated 2 days before her death, where she wrote, "I think Marcus is poisoning me. I found a small bottle of white powder hidden in his office drawer. I'm so tired. I don't know what to do. I'm going to take it to be tested tomorrow. I'm scared." And there was nothing after that, because tomorrow never came for her. And I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. But I took the diary and I searched Marcus's office, and in the back of his desk drawer, behind files, I found it, a small bottle with white powder still inside, and I knew I had him. But then I heard the front door open and voices, Marcus and Jennifer coming home early. And I panicked and grabbed the bottle and the diary and ran to the window in the guest room and climbed out onto the porch roof and jumped down into the bushes, scraping my hands and knees. But I didn't care, because I had the evidence. And I ran to my car, parked down the street, and drove straight to David's house. And we stayed up all night going through everything. And in the morning, we went to the police, and Detective Sarah Morrison took our statement and took the bottle and the diary, and she said she would open an investigation. And 3 days later, they exhumed Caroline's body, and the toxicology report came back positive for lethal levels of arsenic in her system. And the police arrested Marcus and Jennifer at his office in front of everyone. And I felt this savage satisfaction watching him being led away in handcuffs. But it wasn't enough, because Caroline was still gone, and nothing would bring her back. The trial took 8 months, and every day I sat in that courtroom listening to the evidence, listening to how Marcus had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on Caroline 6 months before he started poisoning her, listening to how Jennifer was actually a nurse he had met at a medical conference, and how they had planned this together, buying the arsenic online, using fake names, adding small amounts to Caroline's food and drinks, and watching her slowly deteriorate. And the prosecutor painted a picture of such cold-blooded, calculated evil that the jury looked physically ill. And Marcus's lawyer tried to create reasonable doubt, but the evidence was overwhelming. The diary, the poison bottle, the text messages they had found on both their phones, where they talked about what they would do with the money, how they would travel the world, how they would finally be free. And the most damning evidence came from Caroline herself, because the prosecutor revealed something that made everyone in that courtroom gasp, including me. Because apparently, 10 days before she died, Caroline had gone to her lawyer, alone, and changed her will. And she had recorded a video statement to be opened only in the event of her death under suspicious circumstances. And when they played that video in court, I saw my aunt sitting there looking frail and tired, but her eyes were clear and determined. And she said, "If you're watching this, it means I'm dead, and it means my suspicions were correct. Marcus is poisoning me. I've known for 2 weeks now. I had the powder tested, and it's arsenic. I could go to the police, but I have a better plan, because if Marcus wants my death so badly, he can have it, but he won't get what he wants. I've changed my will. Everything goes to charity, to women's shelters and educational funds, and Marcus gets nothing. Jennifer gets nothing. And I've written everything down, every symptom, every suspicion, every piece of evidence I could gather, and I'm leaving it with my lawyer so that justice will be served after I'm gone, because I won't let them win. I won't let them profit from my murder. And to my family, especially to my niece, who I love like a daughter, please know that I'm at peace with this decision. Sometimes the only way to catch a monster is to let them think they've won, to let them complete their crime, and then watch as everything they schemed for turns to ashes in their hands. I love you all. Goodbye." And when the video ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except for Marcus and Jennifer, who sat there pale and defeated because they realized that Caroline had outsmarted them, that she had known all along and had turned her own death into the trap that would destroy them. And the jury deliberated for only 3 hours before coming back with guilty verdicts on first-degree murder and conspiracy, and the judge sentenced them both to life without parole. And as they were led away, Jennifer was crying hysterically, but Marcus just looked empty, broken. And I felt this strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow, because justice had been served, but the cost was my aunt's life. And afterward, I went back to her grave alone, and I laid fresh flowers on the stone, and I told her that she had won, that her plan had worked perfectly, and that she was the bravest person I had ever known. And as I stood there, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, and I felt this warmth on my face. And I could have sworn I heard her laugh, that beautiful, joyful laugh she had. And I smiled through my tears because I knew she was finally free, and that her love and her courage had reached across death itself to make sure that evil paid its price. And I promised her that I would live the kind of life she would be proud of, that I would be brave and kind and fight for justice just like she had. And as I walked away from that cemetery, I felt her spirit walking with me. And I knew that some bonds are too strong for death to break, and that love, even in the face of the darkest betrayal, will always find a way to shine through.